Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, a call for transparency as the state's Children, Youth, and Families Department responds to criticism over a committee that had been closed to the public.
If you want to improve this department, open it up. Warts and all, let's see what's going on and see if it can't be repaired.
And oil and gas revenues are booming, but will lawmakers be able to take advantage of that extra money? New Mexico in Focus starts now.
Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. Public outcry has been building over a new committee inside the state's Children, Youth, and Families Department. That committee has met twice, and both meetings were closed to the public. In less than 15 minutes, senior producer Lou DeVizio sits down with the New Mexico Foundation for Open Government to talk about the impact this lack of transparency has on the children meant to be protected by this department. Then, in the second half of the show, Lou catches up with the Secretary of CYFD to ask why those meetings have been closed and how she plans to rebuild community trust in her department. Later on, we'll hear from New Mexico State Forester on what's been a historic fire season in our state. Our land executive producer Laura Paskus asks why 2022 grew so far out of control. Now, state coffers have earned an extra $1.7 billion in the last 4 months from oil and gas revenues. That's the most ever in any 4-month period. But in the boom and bust cycle of the oil and gas industry, that money has strings attached. Let's get to the line. We have the perfect panel this week to talk through this record-breaking fossil fuel revenue. First, it's former New Mexico State Senator Dee Dee Feldman. And we are lucky enough to have another Roundhouse veteran with us, former State Senator Diane Snyder. Thanks to you both for being here. And rounding out the group this week, Crystal Ciarza from Ciarza Social Digital. Now, the situation with this boom in oil and gas cash is it's treated as one-time money. That's important. That's because we can't count on seeing totals like this again. You just can't. That means it can't be used to do things like create new programs, add permanent jobs, or increase pay for state employees, but it can help with one-time infrastructure investments. It definitely makes for a tough situation budgeting this money, guys. Senator Feldman, I'd like to start with you and your perspective. Given the stipulations that come with one-time money like this, how do lawmakers approach spending decisions when the pile is this big and growing even bigger?
Well, this is part of a larger problem, of course, and that is the boom and bust cycle that New Mexico finds itself in. Mm-hmm. And this is clearly, we're on the boom side of that now, but and will be probably for the next two or 3 years. Mm-hmm. But the bust will come. As it did in 2008, 2009, and before that, 2000, 2001. Mm-hmm. And we got to prepare for that. So as much as we might like to spend all of that surplus that we have now, and I think there'll be like $1 billion in new money next year, as much as we'd like to spend that on sort of glitzy and needed capital outlay projects, that give credit to those who appropriate the money. We also, I think, need to look at the idea of putting some of that money away into trust funds or rainy day funds in order to meet the busts that is certainly coming. I haven't heard as much about that. But the legislature has created a couple of trust funds in the past to deal with this circumstance. The Children's Trust Fund, number one, and also there is, I think, a reserve that New Mexico has and can put some of this surplus in. It's not that popular because as a legislator, you have a lot of people coming to you asking you for example, for new fire trucks and new fire equipment to fight forest fires. Right. But prudence, I think, would dictate preparing for the bust cycle.
Good point there. Senator Snyder, I mean, the estimates now from Legislative Finance, LFC estimates the state's take from oil and gas will reach $5.2 billion for the fiscal year. Roughly $1 billion more than last year. It's a phenomenal amount of money. What's your biggest concern when you think about this and for lawmakers and how we actually dole out this kind of money?
two things. One is, yes, it has to go to capital projects, but if you build a facility, like a generational facility, what you can't fund is the staffing and the other. It has to be something tangible. It has to be capital outlay. And so we tend to go, all right, well, we'll take that from the general fund, the operating monies. But that also, when we have the bust in severance tax monies, that means we also have a bust usually in the general fund money. So that's an issue for me. And the second thing is how we allocate it. We've made some positive changes, but I have to tell you, just as one example, since we're talking about them this morning, is 3 times when I was in the Senate, I put in a bill that would establish a public safety trust fund. It would be so that all of those people, the small communities who needed a fire truck, or one of the things I gave in Albuquerque was cameras for inside that can see through smoke, which helps rescue. Those kinds of things could be purchased through this fund. And it would be, I can't remember exactly, it seems like it was 0.5% or of the monies that came in, and it would establish this fund. It's specific to that use. And I think we have to start doing that a little bit if we're ever going to get out of the concept of, okay, you want to build a building or you want to buy a fire truck, here's $50,000. Well, that won't buy a fire truck. And I know several people have worked diligently on trying to change that around. But one of the things I'd like to see them do on capital outlay is come to some agreement on what percentage would come off the top and be for statewide projects. Because the governor gets her part, the Senate gets their part, and the House gets their part of it.
Right.
But then you would have a committee. The first round would be through the finance committees, but then a final decision where you have to come and present your reasoning and a real action plan or development plan. And that way, then, like we needed improved roads down in the southeast corner of the state for years and years. And it was only the last 2 years where we've had so much money that money went into that. They were having to depend on their legislators to put 100,000 or 50,000 or whatever into a combined pot. So I think we need to focus on, particularly when we have so much money, is what are our direst needs? Bridges being one of them.
Right.
And take that, because that's public safety. That is the welfare of New Mexicans. And I think we have to take and make a commitment, the legislature and the governor, to that money primarily will go to long-term capital projects.
An interesting point there. Yeah.
Funding them totally.
That's right. You know, Crystal, State Senator George Munoz made an interesting point about capital projects, now that we're talking about that, or this, that he wants to increase the funding because inflation, of course, have made, these projects cost more. A prudent thing to do? I think he's onto something here, but I'm interested in your opinion. Is that an efficient avenue for some of this money?
Until capital outlay funding can be more transparent with the way that the money is being spent, I actually don't think it's a great idea to spend it all on capital outlay. And I say this for the sake of transparency in government. And not only do I, but George Munoz has a really good point, though. We've been here before. How do we make sure that we can weather the storm afterwards? And I appreciate our senators who are phenomenal representatives of New Mexican government. But I really have to take a step back and say, okay, if we have a surplus, can't we just take the time to actually put a strong strategic plan of priorities for the state of New Mexico. When I look at this surplus, I think of a person that had just recently won the New Mexico lottery and says, I have $2 million new dollars in my bank account. What am I going to do? I'm going to spend it on a Lambo, preferably a McLaren. I'm going to spend it on making sure that I have a really great trip to Tahiti. And I'm going to spend it on the things that I really think are my priorities for my well-being. That's not what we have here in New Mexico because of the boom and bust. And I think we really need to take a step back. And I hear what Senator Snyder is saying in terms of making sure that we spend it on infrastructure and we also spend it on public safety. And I understand that. But whenever the governor and our legislator comes together, this is going to be a dogfight of money here, money there, money here, and money there. And we just need to simplify the process of really reprioritizing what's going to be in the best interest of New Mexico, right? What's going to make sure that our future generations don't have to worry about money in the future. We have to treat this like the way that we treat our personal finances as family. And I think that would be the best approach in terms of how we treat this money. Yes, trusts are really phenomenal idea. Yes, public safety trusts are even phenomenal because public safety is always going to be here. But we have longer generational issues that are like the millennial generation and the Gen Z generation have to worry about. Why not put that type of funding of surplus into it where the long term they're going to have it as time goes on. And I think that would be a better approach. And also to a boom and bust plan, right? Yes, we have a boom now, but when there is a bust, how do we make sure that jobs are still being kept? How do we make sure that our generations can survive inflation periods? Economists are even showing that in 2030, there's going to be a recession worse than the one in 2080. And even Kelly O'Donnell in the article from the paper on Albuquerque.news said, we have to start planning in a more concrete fashion for a future economy where oil and gas has less a prominent role in the economy. We have to think about diversifying. It's the simple basics of economics where if you're looking at wealth, you look at diversifying your type of income. Yes, oil and gas is there. Great. Yes, we now have the cannabis industry. Yes, we've had the film industry. Yes, we've had health as a major industry in New Mexico. But what other economies can we grow so that way oil and gas becomes less of the pie, but still becomes a strong footprint over time?
That's a good point there. Very good point. Thanks for talking through that one with us, of course. We'll be tracking this money in the coming weeks and months ahead. In about 10 minutes, I'll join the panel back here at the virtual roundtable to talk through new developments in a proposal to store nuclear waste from around the country right here in New Mexico. Stay with us.
Are you looking at the fuel conditions outside of the area you're trying to burn? Are you asking the question of if an ember were hypothetically to travel a mile north, south, east, or west of where your burn area is, what's the fuel condition like there?
The state's Children, Youth, and Families Department is facing some intense scrutiny following a committee meeting that was closed to the public. That committee was created in the last few months following a lawsuit in the death of a 4-year-old Albuquerque boy. The boy had allegedly told COAFD caseworkers that he was being physically and sexually abused by his mother's boyfriends, but despite that, he was returned home. He was found beaten to death in 2019. Now, the new committee was created to understand how that incident and others like it were allowed to happen. But without public access, journalists, government watchdogs, and citizens have become frustrated with the lack of transparency. One of those groups is the New Mexico Foundation for Open Government. Senior producer Lou DeVizio spoke with the group's executive director, who says COAFD is making an unethical and potentially illegal mistake.
Melanie Majors, thanks for joining me today. I want to talk about this new committee in the Children, Youth, and Families Department. It's obviously been causing some controversy by closing itself off to the public. I'm told by the department that it's strictly an advisory board or body reviewing the ways that the department responds to critical incidents like child deaths. Why, in your view, in the view of New Mexico Foundation for Open Government, is it so important for the public to be involved in this particular step of the process?
If an agency wants to be transparent, what better way to do it than open up their proceedings? the CYFD folks that met said that they would not let the public into the meeting, but they would provide minutes. Well, doesn't that raise questions? What is in the minutes? What was left out of the minutes? And why, if they provide minutes, why can't the public be in the meeting?
So the public information officer that I spoke to from CYFD told me that the committee isn't subject to Open Meetings Act. Regardless, they seem to want to keep it closed if they have the legal avenue to do so. He says that that's because it's not a decision-making body. Based on your understanding of the law, is that a legitimate reason to close these meetings to the public?
I don't think it's a legitimate reason to close these meetings, and I don't know that they're not a policy-making body. Who else makes policy for CYFD but the folks who work at CYFD? The fact that the board or commission is advisory, possessing only the authority to make recommendations to the public agency, should not remove it from the scope of the government in the Open Meetings Act.
They think otherwise. And I just want to know your personal opinion on why it's so, I mean, these are serious allegations that are being covered in this meeting, potentially. According to Albuquerque Journal reporting, during the last meeting, the committee was going to look into an update on a review by an outside consultant. The department hired that consultant to look into these so-called critical incidents like child deaths. I mean, why, in your personal view, is it so important for the public who is served by this department to know how the department is handling these serious cases?
Well, just in the last 3 years, and just the deaths that have been reported by news outlets, because CYFD, of course, doesn't always let the public know what's in their records. There have been 26 children who have died. Doesn't the public need to know what happened to those 26 children? Isn't it incumbent that taxpayer dollars that are being spent supposedly to protect and shield these children from harm, and we know nothing about what's being done? We don't have any answers. We don't have any information. And 26 young people have lost their lives. You know, childhood is a finite time of life. As such, shouldn't we all try to make sure that that finite time of life is as good as it can be? And it always seems to me that CYFD is more concerned about protecting the operations of the agency than the lives of the children that they are supposed to be serving.
There are a few allegations that kind of back up what you're saying, transparency issues surrounding the department recently. One of them actually seemed to spark the formation of this committee, at least chronologically. According to reporting from KOAT, an investigator working on the case of a 4-year-old who was found beaten to death in May of this year testified under oath that she had been told by her managers at the department to delete notes that they didn't want to be recorded in their system. She said during a deposition that she believed that they were anticipating an investigation into the 4-year-old's death. That happened more than a year after a different incident where department leadership directed staff to communicate on an app that automatically deletes chats. I know that's been well covered. Do you see these instances as a pattern?
Oh yeah. You know, we had high hopes when the new secretary came in, because she really was talking about transparency, and that transparency would be part of the operations moving forward. We haven't seen any indication of that. And just the 2 incidences that you have alluded to. When there is no transparency, you don't know what's going on. Destruction of public records is a felony. Destruction of public records is against the law in New Mexico. And there are distinct laws, rules, etc., about the disposal of records. And I think there's about 400 different categories of records and how they can be disposed of properly. And someone telling someone to get rid of a record because there may be a lawsuit, I have a real problem with that. And I think the citizens of New Mexico have a real problem with that.
What's your in a perfect world scenario for what happens next with the department?
A perfect scenario would be to open up the meetings. Open up the meetings, open up the records. New Mexico Foundation for Open Government operates a hotline. We receive many calls on the hotline from people who are frustrated with trying to deal with agencies. And one of the agencies that they are often frustrated with dealing with is CYFD. I understand that they need to have rules in place for sensitive information, but some of the information that is often asked for is not of a sensitive nature. It's statistics, it's information on data sets, it's information that has no identifiers, someone's name, they may have their age, but it doesn't have their name, it doesn't have where they live, etc. And CYFD continually is a roadblock to transparency. If you want to improve this department, open it up, warts and all. Let's see what's going on and see if it can't be repaired so that the lives of children are not in peril.
This is the work of the people. The people of New Mexico deserve a public child welfare system that is responsive to their concerns. And I am committed, as the governor is in my appointment to this role, in serving the interests of the public in this work and making sure that, yes, we want to be more transparent.
Thanks, Lou. We'll hear from the Secretary of the Department in a little over 10 minutes. First, let's bring our line opinion panelists back in to talk through another developing story. New Mexico could soon become a dumping ground for up to 10,000 canisters of nuclear waste from around the country. The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, says it's recommending approval of Holtec International's license to store that waste between Hobbs and Carlsbad. It's a proposal that's caused a lot of strong reactions around the state. Let's start there. Senator Snyder, what was your reaction when you first heard about this plan?
That we were going to hear the same battles and same comments that we've heard in the past about WIP and what to do. I kind of look at it and I was just going, okay, the first response is, what do the people who are living closest to it have to say? Because the potential for danger or harm is greater, in my opinion, in their area. So what do they think? Most of the ones that I've read and heard about, they're pretty on board with it. I think that those of us who live in central and northern New Mexico and even southwestern, WIP is not a daily part of our lives, but it is for southeast New Mexico. So I do not think that this proposal generates as much caution as it does from us in other parts of the state. I also look at it's there, the commitment is there for 40 years, and go, 40 years, but it's not a very long time in terms of the existence of nuclear waste and how long it survives, the survival of it. So but it is a short period of time. They have made a commitment to finding a permanent place. This is supposedly a temporary place that it will be. I'm not very believing of that. I think once you've invested the money, initial monies in the funds, and people have gotten accustomed to it, then you just will expand. But the one thing that worries me the most is the transportation of it. Yes. To the location.
Let me jump in on that if I could, and if you allow me to kick that over to our other senator here, this idea of training this stuff in. We all remember the protests when the WIP was first opening, on the highway overpasses because we were concerned this stuff was going to be on our highways. Same concern, Dee Dee, that, on rail, is it the same for you or is it worse, possibly? What's your sense of that?
Yes, it's definitely worse.
Okay.
It's going to be coming from all over the nation, from decommissioned nuclear plants, from New Jersey, from Michigan, from Massachusetts, some of which Holtec owns itself. And I think the important thing here, and frankly, the environmental impact statement that was put out by the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which approved this facility, and it's a private facility, it was a whitewash. It was really a whitewash. Wow. in terms of the transportation in particular, and dangers that happen. And we've seen it with WIP. Of course, we've seen how, the facility was closed down for 2 years. We spent $2 billion in government funds to clean it up. This is a commercial facility. Don't forget, there's a big difference between WIP and this facility. This is a commercial facility that is designed to store very high level waste. The waste at WIP is low level and less dangerous for those surrounding it, for those who work with it, for those who transport it, than this spent nuclear fuel rods, which are deadly and subject to rail accidents and sabotage. So I'm heartened by the opposition of many people to this, because it's not just an issue of Hobbs and Carlsbad, which largely approve of this.
That's a good point there. That your last point, the other senator made as well. Crystal, there's a lot of this stuff around the country. I mean, we're talking, I'm reading here, 200 million liters of this kind of waste still sitting at Hanford. There's a bunch of it still at the Savannah River site, 138 million liters. I mean, we're talking a ton of this is out there. But our entire delegation, including our governor, has said, no, thank you. Should that mean something? We understand from Dee Dee, of course, what she just explained, it's a private deal here. But how stiff should the opposition be from our elected folk here?
It's one of those situations that I think about and I say, yes, I don't like to take the approach, anybody that's ever worked with me knows, I don't like to take the approach of no. We have to take the approach of what can we do better? And I think the nuclear power conversation actually is a conversation that should be started here in New Mexico, but actually spreads to the federal level. Because if all the states start saying no, we're going to have a problem. According to TechCrunch, of course, nuclear power plants in the United States generate 2,000 metric tons of nuclear waste per year. So what does that mean? If we start saying no, everybody else is going to say no. We're going to have nowhere to potentially store this waste. So I think that New Mexico, especially with the new space industry that we have, and among the innovations in film and the rest of the other industries, I think there's actually an opportunity for us to change the conversation. Instead of no, what if we actually took this conversation and talked about it in a form of, what if it's nuclear recycling? Because conversations across the country, we don't have those conversations enough, but across the world, places across the world are actually encouraging, instead of waste storage, talk about it from recycling. And I think New Mexico can actually lead that conversation in some way, shape, or form if we just say, no, we can't have waste cycling, especially since it harms the Mother Earth of New Mexico. But what if we actually change it into something different that we can welcome?
I hear your point, but that's a flip that would be years in the coming. So what do you do with the waste that we have now? Let me throw that to Senator Snyder. Sure. There's a proposal in this legislature last session to formally oppose the plan. It did not pass, which is very interesting to me. I'm curious where the legislature fits into this beyond our delegation.
Well, the governor is very much opposed. There is a Senate committee that called the Radioactive and Hazardous Waste Committee, which brought the bill. Senator Jeff Steinborn brought this bill forward to reject this plant, and they ran out of time, and they did not, and it died in Senate Judiciary.
Right.
It's going to be reintroduced again, and I think that people will be a little bit more serious about it this time. The Attorney General is bringing suit against Holtec. Remember, once again, let me say, this is a private facility. And it's very unlike WIP. And the rationale for WIP is New Mexico had such a major role in the atomic age, the birth of the atomic age, and the mining of uranium, that it was justified to have a part of the solution, as Crystal said, in storing it in WIP. This is not the case. Here, we have 94 nuclear reactors around the country. And, a lot of people have said the safest solution for this is on-site storage of the spent fuel rods, and not floating them on a barge out in Lake Michigan, which is one of the things that Holtec wants to do with the plant it owns up there.
Wow.
And not transporting it by rail all over the country, but storing it on site.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's another rational alternative that really certainly was not considered in this environmental impact statement.
Yep, good
Sure.
point there.
And Jean, and I just
But
wanted to comment too, like
Sure.
I actually, so to kind of sum up my point earlier is yes, the for now is no, but the for now should lead to better federal funding or federal resources to actually make sure that this is not New Mexico's problem. Senator Harry Reid in Nevada had advocated for no in Nevada, and Nevada is still problematic in terms of storage. We don't want to be the next Nevada when it comes to a situation like this.
Yep, good point there. Thank you all for that discussion. This is an issue we'll be following here at New Mexico in Focus for sure, and on Our Land for sure. Now, something else Our Land has been covering relentlessly over the past few months is this year's fire season. We can learn a lot from it, and fires of the past too, like the Cerro Grande fire, a prescribed fire that burned out of control in the Jemez Mountains in 2000. Officials with the U.S. Forest Service, the agency responsible for the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fires, still won't grant interviews, but Our Land executive producer Laura Paskus spoke with Laura McCarthy, the New Mexico State Forester, to ask about the conditions that aggravated this year's fire season and how to make prescribed burns safer.
Laura McCarthy, welcome and thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
So it is not over yet, but this has been a historic fire season in New Mexico. Were you among the surprised at all?
I definitely was not expecting that by the 12th of April, we would be in a full-blown fire season. You may remember that the Hermit's Peak fire started on April 6th, and then April 12th was the start of the McBride fire.
So I know we know this, but why this fire season this year?
So I think there are a bunch of different factors. One is the kind of monsoon season that we had last year that was pretty average, that resulted in a lot of vegetation growth, a lot of grasses and robust shrubs, and they dried out over the fall and winter. And then our winter moisture we had some, it was below average, the temperatures were higher, so the effect of each snowfall in terms of recharging the ground, like as it melted, was less. And we ended up in late March with not much soil moisture, snowpack that had left early, and all this dry grass and brush from the previous summer. That set us up in terms of fuel conditions. Then it got windy, and we've done some analysis to ask the question, well, how windy? Because most New Mexicans know April is always windy, but we have data that shows that April and May were both a lot windier than normal, or I shouldn't say than normal. They were a lot windier than the previous 20 years. That's the time period we looked back over.
And of course, we know the Forest Service's role in the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fires. For people who aren't always paying attention to land management issues, there can be some confusion sometimes between the U.S. Forest Service and your agency, New Mexico State Forestry. Does the state have a say in what the Forest Service is doing on federal lands? And has that changed since the spring? Could this change?
That's a complex question. So legally, we have no say. we try to influence them, and we are a reciprocal partner, and we sometimes pay for projects, which gives us more of a say, because if we're going to transfer money, then we're signing a document, and that document will have management intent in it. But at the end of the day, and especially in terms of those two prescribed burns, they were different. One was the Hermit's Peak fire was a broadcast burn, and the Calf Canyon was a pile burn, so different techniques. We had no say at all in either of those fires. We were not involved in the planning. We were not involved in developing the prescriptions, and we did not have any management role in the implementation.
So since since April, which is 3 months now, I've been requesting interviews with the U.S. Forest Service to talk about those fires, but more broadly about what tools we really have as a society as forest conditions are changing with warming. Prescribed fire is an important tool. There's also thinning. But I'm curious, I would love to hear from you. I know you've been thinking about these issues for a long time. What tools do we really have to deal with our forests as it gets warmer, drier, windier?
So scientists keep telling us that fire is essential in southwestern ecosystems, and it's not a one size fits all. So the forest you see behind me is in the Gila National Forest. It's in the wilderness. It's in an area where fire is not, it's often managed for a resource benefit. And I'm just gonna slide over a little bit. And you can see, like, you've got this cohort of young trees coming up with grass, and around it, bigger trees, and a lot of space between trees. And this is what fire does. It cleans out the undergrowth. And if you were to have a fire right now in this forest, it would stay out of the treetops, which is what it's supposed to do. It would burn along the ground, and it would thin out those baby trees. Maybe a few of them would survive, but that's nature's way of managing the forest. And so prescribed fire is an important tool. And my view is that climate change outpaced our prescribed fire protocols. And I can dive into that a little bit if you would like.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I started really pondering this actually as soon as I understood the impact of the Hermit's Peak fire escape, and just running over it in my mind, comparing it to the Cerro Grande fire, which for me personally was a career-changing fire in that I really hadn't been involved professionally in fire except as a firefighter. And then I kind of left firefighting, and then the Cerro Grande fire happened, and I started, after that, I got very involved in fire policy. And the thing about the Cerro Grande fire that stuck with me was that everything they did was within their prescription, and they were burning in an area that could be very wet. And they had tried to burn it a couple of years previously, and it was always too wet. So they waited for it to dry out enough to burn. But what they didn't count on was the conditions of the Ponderosa pine forest 1,000 feet elevation lower. And so when it escaped and that ember went down 1,000 feet, it took off and was uncontrolled. Not terribly dissimilar from what happened here. And so a couple of the lessons learned I think, and these are things that that I know are being considered as the Forest Service does their review. So one of them is in the planning, are you looking at the fuel conditions outside of the area you're trying to burn? Are you asking the question of, if an ember were hypothetically to travel a mile north, south, east, or west of where your burn area is, what's the fuel condition like there? And what would happen with an ember that mile away? I think that is something, given climate change and the non-linear nature of how climate change affects forest ecosystems, that we have to start thinking that way. So adding new layers of contingency to our planning.
Right.
That's one tangible thing that it would narrow our window of opportunity to burn, but it could also really make it somewhat safer.
Barbara Vigil took over as Secretary of New Mexico's Children, Youth, and Families Department in August of last year. She came in during a precarious time for the department. It was facing intense criticism over the deaths of children under CYFD supervision and a lack of transparency surrounding those cases. Now, earlier in the show, we told you about the new CYFD Steering Committee, created to analyze a report into the way the department responds to those incidents, but its only 2 meetings have been closed to the media and the public. We wanted to understand the reason the department is discussing those matters in private. Senior producer Lou DeVizio sat down with the secretary to ask why.
Secretary Barbara Vigil, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Lou.
Of course. I want to ask about this new steering committee created in the last few months. Can you just start by explaining why it was created and what the objective of the committee is?
Yes, the committee was formed by me at my direction for the purpose of examining CYFD services, particularly in the area of grievances and how we resolve complaints or grievances within the agency. And it was really designed to enhance our services to the public. So it was created by me following the last legislative session because I believed that I needed input from committed individuals who are interested in system improvement, and invited those individuals who are now members of the committee to join us and examining our processes and procedures, and with the goal of making recommendations on system improvement.
Okay, understood. The meetings themselves, I'm sure you've heard, but there has been some controversy about the fact that reporters and the public haven't been able to get in. Why was that a decision that you made, I assume?
Sure. First and foremost, this is an advisory committee, and so their recommendation will not be legally binding. So we looked at the Open Meetings Act and made a determination that this fell outside of the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. But for the most part, it was really about enabling the committee to do its work without, the constraints of having either the media or other folks viewing their comments or weighing into on their views, and so forth. And it's a common practice in both private industry and public service that a leader of an organization would pull together folks that have specialized knowledge and experience to provide recommendations to assess a situation and provide recommendations on how to improve that organization. And that was my intention. It certainly by no means was intended to be a way to meet in secret. It was simply what I believed at the time to be the best approach for the work of the committee.
Understood. Now, saying that you wanted people to be able to speak freely and all of these things. There's also a history predating your tenure of a lack of transparency or a perceived lack of transparency from your department. Did you take that into consideration when you made that call? And because, I mean, from the outcry we've seen, it's obvious that the public would like to at least be able to see what's going on inside those meetings rather than just having the agendas afterwards.
Sure, and yes, absolutely. I didn't believe that it would generate this much suspicion or concern. I sincerely believe that the work of the committee would move perhaps more smoothly with not having the public weigh in, or in particular the media weigh in on the debate that the committee was having with respect to the issues that were presented. Having considered the concerns that have been raised about that, I've actually thought carefully, in the interest of transparency, that it would indeed be better for the committee's meetings to be open to the public, where the public can sit and observe the information that's being shared, the questions that are being asked, the responses being given with respect to the work of the department. So going forward, yes, we will be making those meetings open to the public.
All right, so just to be clear, these meetings moving forward will be open to the public and the media?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome, some breaking news, thank you. The department considered broad ways, I mean, like I said before, these perceived transparency issues have been around for years now. Has it thought of a strategic action plan, for a buzzword or something, to be more transparent moving forward?
This is the work of the people. The people of New Mexico deserve a public child welfare system that is responsive to their concerns. And I am committed, as the governor is in my appointment to this role, in serving the interests of the public in this work and making sure that, yes, we want to be more transparent. It's one of the principles upon which I lead this agency. It's accountability, collaboration, and transparency. It's very, very important to the work that I do. But it also, there's that balance of keeping the circumstances and facts pertaining to individual children very private and confidential as required under the law, but on the other hand, ensuring that the people of New Mexico are confident that the work that we're doing is in accordance with best practices and moving our system forward in a better way.
New Mexico has a new crisis hotline meant to help people through mental or emotional health issues and substance misuse. Let's bring back our line opinion panel for one more discussion. Everyone in New Mexico will have access to the new 988 crisis support line. The state says it will reach significantly more New Mexicans who need mental and behavioral health support. Now, how important is that to the state? Not only made this happen, but did it now as we're coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic? Dee Dee, I'll ask you that first. Well-documented issues with mental health issues that are ongoing from COVID-19. Is this the right time to do this?
Yes, this is exactly the right time to do this. It is not entirely new. We have had crisis lines in the past. Agora, for example, runs a suicide prevention line. And we have consistently in New Mexico had a very high suicide rate, proportionally, particularly youth suicide rates. And those suicides are done using guns. So this is a national thing, this 988. The difference here is that you call this number and you are hooked into a local line that is staffed by a trained counselor. I think it's designed to replace 911. Which a lot of suicide and mentally ill people call. Anyone in trouble can call it. But the problem with that is that, 911 is designed to dispatch police and fire personnel to your house or to your location. And that's not always great with somebody contemplating suicide or having a mental health crisis.
Good
So it's the right time for it, though. But this is a complex problem, and there are no easy solutions.
Yeah. Senator Snyder, it's been quoted, it's going to take a little while nationwide to incorporate, but some states are early. We are one of them. And if you call 988, you're going to be given 3 options: to connect with the Veterans Crisis Line, to connect with what they call the Spanish sub-network, not quite sure what that sub-network word's about, or to remain on the line and be connected to a crisis center. And you can also text the word "talk" to that line as well to get somebody to help you. And I say this in this context. In 2020, the U.S. had 1 suicide death every 11 minutes, according to the most recent data from the CDC. And sadly, New Mexico, as Senator just mentioned, had the 4th highest age-adjusted suicide rate in the country, with 520 suicide deaths. And this new number is much shorter and easier to dial, of course. Will that make a difference? That's the bottom line question here. Do you feel in your gut this is going to make a difference?
I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
There's part of my gut that does agree. It's certainly a good option to be trying this, because you need something simple to remember. 988. I can remember that if I need it. But I love the fact that they have where you can push the buttons. New Mexico has one of the highest suicide rates for veterans of any state in the United States. And it's proportionately higher for female veterans than it is for male veterans. So to have this as the first option and to put them through to counselors who are familiar with post-traumatic PTSD or the other kinds of things that I believe, instead of just talking, and they're all really good, I don't mean that, and really should be appreciated, and they get training, but to know that you're talking to someone, a professional that's been there, done that in some of your life, gives you a better chance of success.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really, really good.
Yep.
I hope we rush it through everywhere.
Well, that's a good point there. I mean, it's going to, by the way, you should mention that 988 system is going to build on what we know of, which is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That's been out there a long time. There's 200 crisis centers staffed by counselors, Crystal, and 2.4 million calls in 2020. That's unbelievable. Now, let me ask you this question, though, and bring it close to home. Young people, of course, are a big part of the suicide stats, as Senator mentioned at the beginning of this segment, and so are firearms. According to a study from a prof at NMSU, there were 41 gun deaths among people 19 and under in New Mexico in 2020. More than half of them were suicides. How can we do a better job managing these cases as a society?
I mean, you're asking one of the hardest questions that we all are trying to solve, not only as individuals on New Mexico in Focus, but even as parents, right? And whenever we were looking at this topic and how we were having a conversation or thinking about what our conversation was going to be like today, it always goes back to the home, right? It always goes back to what can we do to better support our families, to build better character of the kids, most importantly, confidence, open conversations with our children. As a mom of a soon-to-be high schooler, how can I make sure that he can tell us whenever he's in crisis, whenever he's sad, whenever he's upset, and how can we have better conversations across the board with our children? And I think that, going back to the gun violence, the issues that our children are having, I do applaud the fact that our state, our local municipalities, even in our counties, Bernalillo County had created the Department of Behavioral Health Services, an entire department to meet the needs of this community. It's good that it is being uplifted on the state level. And when we were going back to the conversation of what are our funding priorities, it's hard for us to advocate for a new building for senior citizens when we know that we need more resources for mental health at the same time. It's just the individual New Mexican always has to come first, and the family always has to come first at the same time. So it's just a challenging conversation we're always going to have.
Absolutely, good, well put. Senator Feldman, research also has proven that access to firearm increases likelihood of a young person attempting suicide. It's one of the reasons a new recent story was so troubling. That Albuquerque Public Schools Chief of Police says 10 guns received on 9 different high school campuses last year. Obviously, recent mass shootings at schools also come to mind. Is this an issue of policing or more of a societal concern, this access to guns issues?
It's both. It's definitely a societal problem. And it's of interest to me that the Albuquerque Public School Board was going to actually put out an advisory to parents that they need to store their, if they have children in the home, they need to store their weapons safely. This would have no effect in law, but as you know, there was a bill last year sponsored by Representative Pamela Herndon that in the wake of the Washington school shooting that would require parents to lock up their guns, essentially. And it failed, but she's bringing it forward again this year, and I think the chances are much better given the school shootings and the threats of such in New Mexico. So it's both. I mean, the schools clearly need counselors. They need mental health rooms for their students. That's part of the societal problem as well as the gun access problem. And the teachers really need to be part of that solution.
Good points there. Thanks again to our line panel as always this week. Be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics these guys covered on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages. This idea in the nation's capital that New Mexico is some kind of a dumping ground for the nation should serve as a wake-up to those who brushed off this notion back when the waste isolation pilot plant opened. Now, the warning back then was once the feds got underground here, there was no turning back, and there hasn't. Did you know WIPP was slated to close in 2024? That was the promise under this temporary wordplay that we're hearing now under the new idea for new waste here in New Mexico. Now, the Carlsbad Current-Argus reported in February this year that WIPP leadership expects the facility to be in use until 2050. So much for temporary at WIPP, and same for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's proposal we discussed in the program earlier. It's an insult for these people to even use the word temporary because they know full well it's not true. As soon as that first barrel goes underground, it's for life. Not mine, not yours. The contents of that barrel is going to be there for life, and many more. We have to know the feds are rubbing their hands together here with this solution. Never mind the rail car problem Dee Dee mentioned or anything else they claim will be safe. That also sounds familiar. Remember in 2014, the radiation leak at WIPP that closed the facility for 3 years? I'm sure the folks in Carlsbad do. There are times to say no to the federal government, even as dependent on them as we are, because saying yes would be a disaster for our reputation, and it won't be temporary. Thanks again for joining us and for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.